Welcome to the Reproductive Justice Conversation. I have an amazing panel today. I'm your host, Matt Barnes, All the Smoke host and ESPN analyst. To my left, we have Jemele Hill, someone who wears a lot of hats, but journalist for The Atlantic. Got my brother, Van Lathan, journalist, podcast host, Oscar award winner. That boy's big. And to my right, our resident professional of the conversation, Nourbese?
Yes, perfect.
Flint, the Senior Director of Black Leadership and Engagement for Planned Parenthood Federation of America. So everyone, thank you very much for joining me. Discussions that need to be had. And no better than the group we have here today. So I want to start it off with an icebreaker. Van, when you hear reproductive justice, what does that mean to you?
So first of all, thank you for having me. The term justice to me means harmony. And I got that from Batman Begins. But, there's revenge, which is making yourself feel better, and there's justice, which is harmony. So when I think of, anytime I hear the word justice, I think of the harmonious existence of people in society or entities in society. So when I think about reproductive justice, I think about women in particular having peace and security in their own bodies and feeling in step and in harmonious balance with the society that is around them. In terms of having their needs looked out for after babies are born, before babies are born, or if babies are not going to be born. I think about a harmonious balance between those women and the society that we live in. That would be my answer.
Jemele, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, for me, justice means agency, because I think when you think about the broader term and how it applies to other societal ills that we have, when there's a lack of justice, it also inspires a lack of hope. And so I think justice allows people to have agency. And clearly, if we're talking about reproductive justice, that's the most intimate agency that you can have for women especially. So, for me, it's about us being able to have something that Black women really haven't had very much of in this society, and that is agency over our own bodies. That's never been a thing for Black women. So that, to me, is the most important element of reproductive justice.
Nourbese, why do you feel there's a hesitation around this topic in 2022?
I feel that's a heavy question, and I think it has a couple of different pieces. So I think when we think about reproductive justice, that does have a definition that I'll get into a little bit later. That I think that because anything that has to do with like sex, repro, the things that we didn't really talk about at the kitchen table has people a little afraid to talk about that or has these taboos around it. And so that carries out into our policy life, that carries out into our regular life, that carries out into our relationships. And so because we don't have, and we as a society hasn't got comfortable talking about all the things that have to do with reproduction and pleasure and sex and all the fun things, that we have this, we're not comfortable talking about it on a regular and consistent basis, which means that it doesn't come out in ways that, what we see other justice pieces, so like criminal justice and our environmental justice, right? Like people feel a lot more at ease talking about that in public spaces.
Mm-hmm. For those who are going to be tuning in that are fairly new to this space, can you explain exactly what reproductive justice is?
Yes, I would love to, and I'm going to get very nerdy for a couple of seconds.
Nerd away.
Yes. So reproductive justice was a framework that was created by Black women right after the Cairo World Conference, so in the early 90s. And it was created because Black women in particular were at this intersection where they didn't quite see themselves in the civil rights movement, right? And so they were always asked to choose their race over their gender, right? And then they didn't quite see themselves in like the second wave of feminism, where they were always asked to pick their gender over their race, right? And so reproductive justice is this framework that brings an intersectionality to the work where people are not asked to choose pieces of themselves when we're thinking about the full type of reproductive life. So we always say in the RJ movement that reproductive justice is everything that has to do with having a child, not having a child, and being able to raise your family in a sustainable space with dignity and respect, right? So that goes not only to reproductive health, it goes to criminal in terms of education, it goes to economics, because we know all those things are particularly important to being able to do all of those, right? I think the last piece that I would add to why reproductive justice, it's so particular, Black women, particularly at the juncture of when RJ came and started to be thought about, were really fighting for the right to have children, right? Because of this long history in this country of making it very difficult for women of color, but particularly Black women, to live full, free lives with their reproduction. So that's the eugenics movement, right? In the sense of the Mississippi appendectomy, right? Where we saw where they're doing experimentation in Puerto Rico on birth control, right? And so reproductive justice is birthed out of that space and is looked at how do we address the oppressions of folks? So not in a personal, I'm going to fix you, are you, but how do we look at the societal issues that are causing oppression for folks in our communities?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Leading to my next question, where is abortion access in America today?
Ooh, okay. That's a complicated question. So when thinking about abortion access today, I want to take us back about 40 years ago. And the reason why I'm starting 40 years ago, that is when it was a little bit after Roe became the law of the land in 1973. And we saw both at city and state levels, a lot of progressive folks in the spaces, right? So the federal was kind of going back and forth, but we had some really interesting things popping in the local level. And then after that, the anti-choice Republican folks are no mas. We are going to figure out how to fight back. And they started putting in a space where they were looking at how to take over local and state governments. And they have done a very good job at that. And they also started looking at how do we take over the judicial space, right? And so we have these two things that are moving at the same speed as judicial nominees, so the courts, and then we're also looking at the state takeover, which is important for a couple of reasons, but one in particular is that the states define redistricting, and so they define the lines. So we have all that cooking about 40 years ago, and that's moving to now. And about a few years ago, we saw the courts with this total takeover, right? And so if you're looking at a lot of the federal seats and more recently the Supreme Court, that there are a lot of very conservative judges that were put there. And so fast forward to what happened a couple of months ago with the Dobbs decision, what we saw was a rollback or a kind of annihilation of Roe v. Wade, which was, and Casey versus Ferguson, excuse me. And those were the two laws that were given abortion access for the state. And that reversed it to the states. And so that whole 40-year plan was taking over the states. The reason why that was so important, because when it reversed it to the states, they have all the people in the power to make it immediately abortion access cut, right? So that day, when the Dobbs decision came down, there were people sitting in clinics that we had to call and tell them to go home because abortion access in a handful of states ended that day. What we're seeing, or what we think that in the next few months, we'll see as much as half, or 26 states in the country, not have abortion access with a ban of either 6 weeks or a complete ban. And what's extra interesting about this is that they are criminalizing it in the very same way you see, or very similar to the way they criminalize drugs, where there actually are felonies for people who are participating in abortion access.
Not just people participating, but people that they deem to be aiding and abetting abortions as well. It's pretty draconian, right?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? the entire time that this seemingly really detailed, strategic, and direct plan was happening, where were the choice?
Where were we at? Like, what were y'all doing? So there was a couple things. So we were looking at these pieces, right? But particularly with reproductive justice folks, we were fighting several battles, right? So we're looking not only at like making sure that we are pushing forward reproductive health access, we're looking at maternal health, we're looking at environment, we're looking at criminal. So we're fighting all these battles and also organizing our communities, making sure that they understand why we should be voting and all those other pieces. And I'm not trying to make an excuse for us, but that was one of the things that we were popping on. The one thing I would say that the anti-choice folks are really good at is like giving money and just like experimenting, right? So they're like, hey, let's make these fake clinics and trick women. Sure, we'll fund that, right? And on our side, we have to like have like all these data maps and all these other pieces in order for us to try anything new and different, right? And so for the folks who are at the like ground level doing some really interesting, hard work, that is like underfunded in a serious way, and like folks are under-resourced in the capacity wise. And so a lot of us have been fighting these battles, but like quietly, like not with a lot of fanfare. And when we were like, hey, abortion access is going to like go, folks are just like, that's stare decisis. We don't need to think about that, right? And so for a lot of repro folks, we have been like kind of like, hey, can somebody help us, please? And like folks have been like, this is not actually the top of what I'm thinking about right now.
Jemele, we're in 2022. How did we get here with this particular situation, but just kind of overall?
Well, I mean, I do think that our attitudes as a populace, that in our minds, people felt like Roe versus Wade was codified law, and it wasn't, right? And so much to what you said is that I think there was a mentality that was very lackadaisical. It kind of reminded me a little bit of when President Obama was in office, and when it came to racial issues, a lot of people started relaxing. And I was like, having a Black president does not address, years of systematic, oppression, inequality, equity issues. It doesn't address all that. It will never fix all that. But nevertheless, it got people, that was the time when people should have been more aggressive. So to your point with everything you're saying about from a judicial, legal state government standpoint, that was when people needed to aggressively vote like that issue was number one on the table. And that unfortunately didn't happen. And, let's be, very clear about this. We've had a lot of conversations, just even taking an even more 64,000 square foot view, is that, there's a very strong, constantly underestimated far-right extremist movement where this is part of the plan. And I think a lot of people in this country, because we have a tendency to do this because we're in our own spaces, in our own world, and we all have work to do. We all have jobs that we are obligated to. We have families. We have, some people have children, like all those things. But the problem is that this movement is not for play, all right? And we need to take that as like the number one threat. And so we got here, a lot of it is just sort of death by 1,000 paper cuts. And it's all come to where now we're in a fight for our most basic freedoms. We're in a fight for our lives. And there's nothing more basic than having the freedom of bodily autonomy, the freedom of choice to do what you want to do with your own body. And, a big reason why in The Atlantic I wrote about my own abortion was because that I think we need to just take this stigma, this layer of secrecy, these conversations that we don't have in our own homes. We need to take that off. And that way, collectively, by sharing our stories, I think that's how you almost build a base of power so that people understand that there are other people like you that have been through these things. And if we collectively stand together, we have a chance to beat back this serious momentum that has begun, in our country.
Nourbese, that leads me to my next question. What are some stigmas you feel we need to lift that are around the health, sexual abortion space and community as a whole?
So many. I was like, where to start? Like, just the idea around sex in general and pleasure, right? And so, because that is like, having open conversations about sexual pleasure is just like not a conversation people are having, right? And so, like,
Probably help a lot of men out there too. Get your shit together, fellas.
I didn't say anything. But yeah, I think that is particularly important because even the sex education conversations are very like science-based, right? And this is what chlamydia looks like. And it's like the worst case of like chlamydia ever.
Well, it was the days where you would just get scared to
scared you
death
for a minute, though.
at
For
sixth
sure.
period. You're like, Jesus! Like, you took me
Gonorrhea
back.
was the other one, I think.
my
Yeah, where they show you,
God.
like-
And they would always unroll it. The teacher would be like, yeah, right here. That's going to be you. You know what I'm saying?
See, the problem with that is that they made people feel like a false sense of like safety, for lack of a better thing, because they're like, well, if like I don't look like this, then like I don't need to get checked out, right? And it's just like, this is not what most people have it.
That's worst case.
This is the worst
What
case.
you got going on is still a problem.
So like 70% of folks that have chlamydia or gonorrhea is like asymptomatic, right? So yeah, there's no symptoms, right? And so that's the other conversation that I think there's stigma around is like STDs, right? And so like, you know, there's like 1 out of 4 folks get STD in their life. For younger folks, particularly younger folks now, that's like more like 1 out of 2, right? And so that's something that happens to a lot of people. And we need to figure out how to talk about that in a way that like makes sense and like in a safe space and for people don't hide, right? And have conversations about it in the dark or not have conversations about it, and then things start spreading more, right? And so that's another piece. I think we need to talk about like relationships and like what it means for it to be like what a healthy relationship looks like, because we don't talk about that either. One of the things that I did in grad school was looked at how videos, like hip hop videos, this is because I love hip hop. So this is no shot to hip hop, but how hip hop videos impact how girls thought about themselves in relationships, particularly Black girls. And there was just a lot of pieces of like, their self-esteem was drawn from like, what does it look like? Or like, this is what I need to do and this is what I need to act like in order to be loved in society, because we didn't have other ways in which we outwardly showed Black girls love, right? And so like things about self-esteem and relationships are just super important that we need to also be talking about.
Van, what would you say are some of the top issues that drive you to vote, whether it be local, state, federal? What are some issues in your mind?
So my overall ethos is about the happiness and sounds crazy, sounds very simple. My overall ethos is about the happiness and freedom of the individual, right? And I think about that as a collective. So when I see access to different things, let me be honest with you.
Here we go. That's what I've been waiting for.
So I have
Just gonna abandon the educated answer you made.
Yeah. Let me be honest. So
Talk to him.
So I have an anxiety disorder, right? And because I have an anxiety disorder, I have fear of other people's fear. So I see someone who can't do something, and I think you have one life to live on earth, and someone tells you you can't marry who you want to marry. You have one life to live on earth and someone tells you you have to have a baby. You have one life to live on earth. You have one experience on this globe. And there's somebody else who, because of their morality or their view of the world, is telling you what it is that you can or cannot do. And I get angry. Like, I get emotional. I get mad. Like, I see a bunch of babies get killed in a school in Texas. And I think there's an answer to this problem. There's a solution here.
But
why don't we care about the solution? Why? There's no possible way that someone who is educated or passionate can tell me that I have to live in that world, that that's just a byproduct of society. And so because of that, I start looking for the answers. And then for me, I start looking for candidates and people who mirror my ideas of what those answers are, right? And I'm willing to have the conversation with anyone at any time about anything. But what we can't negotiate is the value of life and freedom and equal access to things. That's non-negotiable. So that's kind of what the thing is. The fact that I go, you know, like I was having a conversation with a friend and she was telling me that there's this guy in her office and, you know, she likes him. She don't want to talk to him because he's in the office, right? And I was like, fuck him. Have sex with the guy in your office. Who fucking cares? In 150 years, you'll be dead. You think you're going to care? Like, go have a drink with them. Do whatever. I just want people to be able to live their fullest and freest. And I want to support causes, candidates, and initiatives that help them do that. And it just so happens that people that look like us is the least free motherfuckers that we got.
What's crazy to me is, I mean, outside of Clarence Thomas, who's a white man stuck in a black man's body, is older white men who are making decisions for the masses, and they're not the majority. You know what I mean? Like, we're the majority now, but they call us the minority to kind of keep us in that hold. But if you look at us, there's a lot of brown and black people on this earth, but we don't have the necessary voice that we need to have to make it kind of an even playing ground, which is crazy. Jemele, something you would have told your younger self about the reproductive process and sexual health experience as a grown-up now and someone who's openly written about having an abortion of your own?
Well, what I probably would have told myself is something Nourbese said, is that I would have probably talked more about pleasure, right? Because there is a shame that, unfortunately, like most women, we learn about sex from a shame perspective, like, don't do it, this is why you can't, da, 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 da. And, you know, of course, there's a level of responsibility, maturity. The responsibility conversation is one that needs to be had. But I do wish that I would be able to tell my younger self that, you know, sex is fun, right? And that you're also supposed to get something out of sex. It's not, you know, just one person that is supposed to get something. It's like both people are supposed to get something out of sex. I know for a lot of men listening, they probably didn't know that, but
It's new to them?
It's new to them. And they're like, wait, both of us? Yes, both of you, right? Like, and, you know, both of y'all supposed to have an orgasm, not just one person. So I would have talked about it from that standpoint. And I think I also would have tried to maybe explain to my younger self just the value of what I was doing, you know, the value of your own body. That doesn't mean that you have to put it in a glass case, but it does mean that you do, it's very much tied to, you know, your self-esteem and how you see yourself. And so I was lucky because I played sports. And so I think sports for young women and girls is very important because it helps you with your body image, self-esteem, all those things. And so I had a very healthy body image, and I just would have encouraged that part more. And I think probably for me, what was most impactful about the sex conversation and what impacted me the most is, you know, my mother's she's a rape survivor. And so the way that she saw sex is very different because of the trauma she experienced, both as a child and as an adult. And it was through that lens that sex was taught to me. And so I think there was a fear that I had that was very different than maybe other, you know, girls my age. I mean, that didn't stop me from doing it in high school, but the whole point is that I just wish that I would have, that's why the pleasure conversation would have been, I think, important. I mean, because I didn't have my abortion until I was 26, right? And at that point, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to write about it and be truthful and transparent, because certainly we know who abortion impacts. It impacts a lot of Black women, of course. Many of them have other kids and are like worried about finances. That was not my situation, is that I made the choice because I didn't want a child. I just didn't. You know, that was never something that really I saw for myself. And I knew career-wise, I wanted that. And I think it's okay for women to make that decision. Like, it doesn't always have to come under the specter of trauma. Like, it can be just because I don't want that. That's just it. And that's why this option is available, right? That's not to say that this is the option you depend on and lean on, but it is to say that this option is there for a reason. And I exercise my right to have that option. So, you know, what I would say is that I think even in having those conversations, if I were talking to myself, that was, abortion was never something that was discussed, right? Even though there were members in my family that had abortions, I had no idea. And so I think it would have been great to just have a more nuanced, more robust, continual conversation. Because a lot of parents think the sex conversation is just literally one conversation, right? I mean, it's different with, I think, guys. Like, I think y'all are probably taught a little bit differently.
Oh, learn on the fly, trial and error.
Or right.
Vance, I mean, same. I know you want to have same question or wherever you're going to go with it.
Man, so when I was 15, me and my dad, and all of my uncles were sitting around and we're working outside, family-owned company. My dad, I'll never forget this. My dad goes, he looks at me for some reason. I don't know, maybe I just looked like a virgin. Maybe I had a virgin look on my face.
The innocence.
Yeah, he looked at me, he goes, "You had any pussy yet?"
Plain and simple.
And
It sounds like that scene from Boys in the Hood,
all
by the
the
way.
uncles too.
So it's me, and it's not just my dad. And these men were such, I looked at them, it's like they were just larger than life, like gods to me. These are my dad and his brothers. And I'm like, no, I haven't. And I remember, never forget this. My dad goes, "All right, you need to get on that. You're a Lathan man. You can't get to 16, you ain't had no pussy yet, right?" So look, right? And whereas most young men would have taken that and just been like, whatever, I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, I am not good enough for my last name if I don't have sex. What happened was actually something that was pretty profound. Women stopped being people and they started becoming tools for me to access my manhood. They started becoming doorways into my acceptance as a man to the rest of my family. And so I'm freaking out. I'm, number one, judging myself about whether or not I can make this happen, right? I'm asking, I'm in relationships with these little girls and I'm trying to make it happen. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? This has to happen. This is a deal. And it really wasn't until the first time I actually had sex, it was almost a complete accident. I didn't even know she was down. And then all of a sudden it happened. And then after that, I felt silly. But for that entire time in my life, and even moving past that, I think the lesson coming from that was that women are not sentient beings with their own feelings and outlook on the world. They are sort of there to provide you with what it is that you need to get to where you are. They are in some way something that validates your life, either by having your baby or submitting to you or anything like that. And I don't know if my father was trying to teach me that, but the quest to get my dick wet was being put before anything
right?
else. Anything else. And I think a lot of brothers, I don't want to speak, because as soon as I say this, you're going to be like, there goes Van the panderer again. I'm not pandering. I'm saying I think a lot of brothers sometimes, we don't come out of that. We keep chasing that for a while until we meet, in hopes that we're going to meet the one perfect woman that convinces us of her humanity.
Wow.
The one perfect woman that we're waiting for that will be wifey material, that will be more than a receptacle for all of our trauma, our pain, and our semen. And so, if there was one thing, I would just tell myself, just relax. Just chill. It'll happen. It'll be fun. It'll be quick the first time.
Mm-hmm. First handful of times. It's safe to say it wasn't a two-way street for a while.
Right. But you'll get better, and then afterwards, it'll just be a thing, and you can be cool with it. And really more so, I want to be able to teach more young men that lesson. Yeah.
Absolutely. Nourbese, what would you say men's roles, particularly black men's roles, can be in the abortion access space?
I feel like I'm going to get smoked for this. Where to start? I think just picking up where Van kind of left off is to have those conversations around not only sex and sexuality, but relationships and masculinity. I think because we don't really see a lot of men in this abortion conversation right now, right? I saw like a couple of posts from folks, particularly around Dobbs, and they're like, oh man, this is terrible. But you don't see particularly Black men out the same way you see them on other issues, like ready to go to the mat around abortion access. And a lot of that has to do with the stigma that we talked about before, but I also think that there's a conversation around masculinity, our homes, how we are in relationship with each other that is needed, and that can't come from someone like me, right? Like, I need Black men to talk to other Black men and boys. And I need them to be in conversation where they can also be vulnerable, where they can talk their truths, for that doesn't also then keep getting put on the women in their lives in order to like fix that, right? But also carry the weight of that. And so for me, if we could start in those type of conversations, right, then we can start talking about relationships and that we are like, don't get pregnant by ourselves. And so then maybe and hopefully that also leads into like how we could show up, and particularly Black men can show up around abortion access that's like front and loud and proud about it, as well as all the other reproductive health issues, and not kind of be like, oh, y'all take care of that over there, like they're not in relationship with us.
Mm-hmm. Well, some men though, and I don't know if you probably have experienced this, they feel like they are, I guess, how do you get them out of the mindset that them being silent is actually them being some kind of, like,
yeah, so like,
they feel like, oh, we can let y'all decide. Like they're doing something, that's noble by staying out of it. Like, I'm gonna let the women, because they need to lead on this conversation.
It's their bodies.
Yeah, it's their bodies. Like, how do we get them out of that?
And that, because that drives me crazy, right?
Oh man, I thought I was doing the right thing. I'm not even lying.
It's up to you. I mean, that's a lot. I've had a few abortions in my life. Like, to me, it would be up to the woman. You know what I mean?
I mean, it could. I'm not saying like men should be out there like trying to force folks to choose what's happening with their bodies, but being like having and being upfront in the conversation about like what does it mean about like our freedoms being attacked, right?
Yes. Yeah, I'm just putting it in the interpersonal, like her decision. But
like, overall, we would love
right?
for folks to be like out there, right, and not having to be like feel like you were just out there by yourself waving the flag. And not having, nobody's like, oh, that's your issue, girl. Go ahead and do that.
Right. Because they feel like that they're being a benefit by like staying out the conversation about abortion, and it's like, no, you need to.
Well, I want to be in the conversation, but it's interesting because I always say allies speak with you and not for you. You know what I mean? And so sometimes it is just being real. Sometimes it is a gray area of how much you want to make sure that sisters have their voice. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I get to screaming,
no one else.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So you want to make sure, and I'm asking you guys in a really real way. I think it's an interesting thread. What's the way that you do that? Like, do you like is there a prescription? Well,
I think that more men should understand how these laws impact them. I mean, even though from the way they're trying to criminalize it, it's those who aid in the bed. Okay, so you give a girl money for an abortion, all right? You are now a part of the criminal process, okay? Or if, obviously, a doctor, even in some states, if you transport someone to get an abortion, like all of that is on the table. And if you're in a relationship and you're in a state where they have, this heartbeat law, and you and your partner, if something happens to her, where if she's pregnant and there's, God forbid, something goes wrong, where, we heard about the woman in Louisiana who has to walk around carrying a dead fetus. Like, if that's your partner, how do you know what I'm saying? Like, so it impacts men too. Or if that's your wife and you can't even, as her husband, or partner or whatever, you can't even help her. You can't even make the medical decision together. The state is making this decision. So that's why I think it would be important to message to men where this impacts you. Because if you're in a relationship or, whether you've known her for, I've been together 2 years or 2 days, like if her health is at risk at any point and you're in one of these states that have the trigger laws, you're impacted by this too.
Yeah, I just would also, I think being very cognizant of like making space, of course, for women, if you have platforms and things like that to speak, it's super important. So I do not want to like make it seem like, oh no, we don't want to make space for that, because that's really important. But I think also, making sure that like it's not seen as just a women's issue. I would love to see, like, at the marches, like, at the spaces, right, talking to your Congress folks and your state elected officials about this. Like, the same ways that we go to bat when it comes to, like, Black men dying in the street or Black boys dying in the street. And we have, like, full, like, banners and all those other things. And Black women are on the front lines of that, too. Not only because our bodies are being, like, victimized as well, but, like, because we are in solidarity, right, with our family, our friends, our community. And I would just love to see Black men be able to have that type of solidarity as well. So it's not just us standing at the front lines with, like, nobody, like, side to side, behind us, trying to be in front of us, any of that.
Van, why do you think Black men are kind of absent in the larger conversation about this? Is it lack of information, a lack of know-how? The prescription's not refillable? Like, what is it?
You know what I think it was? I think it's just what we just witnessed. I think that sometimes there are communication gaps between Black men and Black women. I don't think it's so interesting. I just don't think we're communicating that well right now.
Black men and Black women?
Black men and Black women.
Across the board, period.
I don't think so, man. I think, and obviously, and I don't want to make too much about splitting the rent conversations on Twitter, right? I'm like, you know what I'm saying? I don't want to make that.
Please don't surface $200 dates.
I don't want to make too much of it. But I think in cases like this, we're pre-programmed with so many ideas of what it is that we should be doing in society. And those things are seen as very individual things. I don't know how many conversations are being had about what it is that we should be doing together, like in unison, in lockstep, like united. Like, what does it mean for us to move forward together? Not what you can handle, not what I can handle, not that I can call you when I need you, or you can call me when you need me, is what makes sense for us to do together. And I think that conversation starts even before this issue. That conversation starts when we're talking about the way boys see themselves, the way young girls see themselves. Those images have to be, and those notions have to be cultivated together in the society. You know what I mean? So for me, I think what we're seeing here is actually a symptom of a larger issue, is that, like, we don't talk enough about how we feel with one another. And to be honest with you, for brothers, everyone wants to say that we don't have the words to articulate how we're feeling. And that's true. That is true sometimes. Sometimes we don't know what we need to say. But sometimes we feel like nobody wants to hear that from us. Like, I'm a 6'4", 280-pound man. Don't nobody want to hear if I had a bad day. That's how the world makes me feel sometimes. The world makes me feel like I need to get out and conquer and do all of this and really save the complaining for something else. So it seems like we only coalesce or come together in times of crisis, and we're not sure what the right crises are. You know what I mean? We're not sure what's worth getting us up and getting us out. So if I were more tethered to you, I would be interested in what's going wrong in your life. You know what I mean? Because it would affect me. And so I think a lot of things need to happen, but more than that, we need to kind of get on the same page about some of that stuff, I would say.
I like that. Has reproductive movement been exclusive of men and women of color, with considering the stereotypes around absentee Black fathers and, just the numbers on, how dangerous pregnancies are for women of color, particularly Black women?
So the reason why the reproductive justice movement was started because women of color weren't seen in other spaces, and our full lives weren't seen, right?
Pick and choose parts.
Right. And so, like, even now, when you think and ask folks, like, when you think about reproductive health or reproductive rights, the person that you get in your mind is like that white woman with the pink hat, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't think of the Black women who I work with on a regular and consistent basis on the day-to-day. And I think that is part of the problem, right? Just personally, I remember, so I have a 1-year-old. Yay. He just turned 1. I'm very happy about that. Keeping a baby alive is a lot of work.
I got 6 of them.
Well, kudos to you.
And some grown-ass friends that I treat like my kids and have to pay for too. So trust me, I feel you.
Right. But like, I also remember the entire time of my pregnancy, I was scared, right? And I have like incredible amount of privilege. I could talk to so many people in the repro space, and particularly the maternal health space. But I still, like, I didn't have, like, put my room together and did the baby shower until like way late because I did not want to have the experience of having to tear down a room because my baby didn't make it, or that he had to figure out, like, I was writing letters to show him that, like, your mother loved you, right, if I didn't make it. And, like, that is, like, the world, like, a lot of Black women live in, right? And, like, that is not the conversation that we are also having in the reproductive health and rights space. And so I would love to see some more of those complexities of conversations, because that is like a real thing. And I know a lot of folks who are Black moms of young Black moms, that was something in their brain, the time and that stress of like, damn, am I going to make it? And that is like the real conversation that we want to have it infuse into this repro conversation that is beyond the like, I feel like the, like abortion access, right? Because like abortion access is super important, and to be able to figure out what happens and how your life, like what happens to your body, and being able to choose, and all of that is super, super important. But I feel like for a lot of Black women, it is not only abortion access, but the right to live as well. Their right to be able to like feed your family, the right to be able to like work and have a career, and all those other things that are just not in the conversation, which is why the RJ movement is so important, but also why I think a lot of them are not wanting to be so a part of the traditional reproductive health and rights space, because we don't see those conversations surfacing.
I mean, what you said, really gave me chills, because my last son, my girl was, 40 years old when we got pregnant. You know what I mean? Black woman too. So on top of it's a high risk, but like you said, luckily we were able to have one, but we lost one after that. You know what I mean? So just to have that kind of, like what you said, where I'm writing letters just in case. Like I couldn't imagine, like it didn't, that struck a chord, you know what I mean? And like I said, I've been through someone who's lost, one, a year and a half ago. So it's just to think about that from a different level. Like, obviously my partner had it, but it hurt, but I just, maybe I'm trying to say I don't understand the level of hurt or the level of concern or the constant worry throughout the process of, is it me or the baby, or is it, you know what I mean? So that's deep.
Well, I'm so glad that more women are sharing their stories, because I don't know about you all, but I grew up with this idea. It wasn't until my friends started having kids. I thought that it was easy. I mean, easy in the sense of like not just getting pregnant, but the birthing process. Yeah, you heard people say, I was in labor 26 hours, but you never think about it as a life or death situation. And it wasn't until some of my friends started experiencing pregnancy difficulties, or it was difficult for them to get pregnant, that I understood like, oh, this is like, a whole different level of trauma to your body that a lot of us really, frankly, are really ignorant to until then. And I think it's especially important for our mothers, our aunts, whoever in our family, to share what they've been through. And a lot of them, there's a cloak of silence around what they have. I didn't know until I started writing my memoir, talking to my mother about she had me at 18 about what she went through. And I was like, hold up, you almost died having me. Like, this is, and my father told me that, like, the doctor said, hey, if it comes down to, you know, your partner or to my mother or me, which one you going with?
Can you imagine that?
Like, they wanted to know before going in there, and I never knew that. Like, that was something, had I not asked those questions, I probably never would have known that. And so I encourage, you know, men, women, boys, whatever, like, ask your parents these stories, because you'd be surprised about some of the things that they've been through.
What would you like to see from the reproductive health space personally?
Yeah, have some of those conversations more out loud, right? Like, just to draw the links, right? So there's some research that's showing that with abortion restrictions in this country, there could be, or estimated, a 33% increase in deaths of Black women from maternal deaths, right? 33%. Because that is how dangerous it is for Black women to have babies in this country, right? Not to say that people should not be afraid to have babies. I want folks to, if that's what they want to do, to be able to do that. But that's the choice,
reality.
right? So like, when we are forcing people and telling them to, like, there's forcing them to have to carry a pregnancy to term. We're not just saying, like, we're forcing you to have this pregnancy term and it's going to be like roses and glasses and all the other pieces. This is literally going to kill some people, literally, right? And so these conversations, I would love to see, like, had more. I would love to see men more a part of those conversations. I would love to see, again, like, more of the fun stuff too, right? But also, when we also think about folks of color, that it is both our joy and our issues and our pains that are brought to the conversation, and not in a scapegoat way, right? So like, we'll pull out this Black woman that had like a terrible pregnancy, or she had to go 5 states in order to get an abortion. But we're not thinking about, like, what actually are we doing to address the issues that this Black woman had with our policy, with our campaigns, with all the other pieces. So she's not just a tool in this space, but actually we are working to uplift her and her issues.
Van, when folks say the word feminism, what does that mean to you, and would you consider yourself one?
Okay, so here's the thing. I think it's a bad idea as a man just to be like, I'm a feminist, because I am. But like, once you say that, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think once you say that, everybody like starts looking to tear you down. You know what I mean? It's like
Why though?
just because I think that, I don't know, man. It's like, you know, you with your homies you play Madden with, and you're playing the game, and then all of a sudden they go, "You a feminist? What that mean?" You know what I mean? And so for me, of course I am. To me, being a feminist, all that means is wanting the best for women, completely independent of what that means for me. I'm not in it. I think the best lane of allyship is, I want your life to be great, whether I benefit from that or not. Okay, whether that has some kind of residual effect on me or not. I just want you to be good. Now, under that definition, how could you not be a feminist? How could you not want women to have every single access to every single right, to every single protection, to the life that they should have? But I think it's very difficult for a lot of men to see women independent of themselves. They think about how a woman's life, you know, directly reflects their own. Well, feminism, what does that mean for us? So what I'm supposed to do? Motherfucker, we're not really talking about you right now.
It's not our turn.
You know what I mean? And I think the cognitive dissonance that exists sometimes is very frustrating, because we have these deep, passionate, ridiculously detailed conversations about white supremacy and how white people have fucked us over. But as soon as those conversations end, we get this weird sense of amnesia about our place.
What we doing?
Yeah, it's like, I'm like, my G, My brother in Christ, you don't see how that's the same.
My brother in
You know what I mean? And it's weird, but like I definitely am a feminist. But if I right now would have put feminist in my Twitter bio, it's gonna be some shit. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that you care that much about women. But to me, I had a conversation with my mom, and I don't know why she did this. This was very eye-opening. It was during the pandemic. I was walking about LA, beard all out to here, just looking straight up vagrant, right?
Black Tom Hanks from Castaway.
Remember you saw me that time?
I saw you.
Remember that time like Matt
I was
coming out?
driving for some reason. I pulled over and said, "Man, what up?"
Right. A bunch of people saw me. One time, Lil Rel pulled over and checked on me. He's like, "Dog, you all right?" You know what I mean? It's like I'm going to work. Like you're out here walking down La Cienega. But I had this conversation with my mother, and my mother said something I will never forget. This convo. She goes, "I daydream about you not being born."
What?
My mother said to me,
"Huh? Are you an only child?"
No, I got a sister. Right. My mother goes, "I daydream about what my life would have been like if I never had y'all." Like sometimes, and I'm like, "Yo, let's go. Let's have the conversation." She goes, "Since you've been born, you've been the center of my life. You and your sister. You've been the center of my life. That's like 40 some years in the past." She goes, "I am a 66-year-old woman. I sometimes look at my life and think, well, what about me?" And as a mother, you don't think that she should be having that thought, but it's really not as a mother. As a woman,
It's a person, right?
Yeah.
You don't think that she should be having that thought because you think that her goal in society is to give and give and give and give and give and give and give till she ain't got nothing left. You come out of the house and then you call her when you need your Social Security card. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, I think having that conversation with her was very eye-opening to me because it doubled down the reason why I feel the way I do about my sisters in society. Because I want them to be able to do everything that they want to do. It destroyed me. And that my mother felt like part of her life was this sacrifice. And she didn't at all deify that sacrifice. You know how sometimes they go, "I gave all of this up for you and I'll do it again." She was actually saying, Maybe I wouldn't.
It's a 50-50 shot.
Yeah,
I might not have.
You know what I'm saying? Maybe I wouldn't. And this woman doesn't. This woman loves me more than anybody can love anyone.
Right.
But just her life matters too.
Yeah, no, that's a great definition for it. I feel like now the word feminism, it's become weaponized like the word woke did.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And as soon as you say I'm a feminist, and especially if you're a Black woman and you say that, and I think it's a lot of ignorance about what Black women have contributed and how we have constructed the feminist movement. And I, not picking on them, but I do probably because I'm around them the most. But it's a certain energy that comes from Black men about that, right? And I'm like at the base of it. They associate feminism with whiteness. And so when you say it, even as a Black woman, they're like, "Oh, you a pick me," whatever the fuck that means, right? Like, "Oh, you just want to be assimilated with them." I'm like, no. I want, as a Black woman, to have full and total control over my body, my life.
Period. First and foremost.
And you should actually want the same thing for me, right? As much as just like I want liberation for you, you should want the same in return for me. And so, I don't have a problem getting that smoke. Yes, I'm a feminist. Yeah. It's okay. And I know it's different when a woman says it as opposed to when you say it.
I understand. I shouldn't care.
But,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, but it is, even for Black women, there's a certain label that you get when you say that.
Before we get out of here, I just wanted to touch on this. When I was doing my research and the team was putting stuff together, I mean, just a number that stood out, which was crazy, but then what the asterisk meant to me was even more alarming. So there's 9 states that have banned abortion outright. The states are Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and Texas. And as you guys see, there's 7 of them that have no exemption for rape or incest.
No.
Which is absolutely disgusting. Can we talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, I think Idaho just joined that list either last week or next week of no exceptions. Yeah, I think one of the things that is important, like one of the no exceptions, we already talked about how this is a death sentence for some people. But I think the other piece of it is looking at the criminalization and those layers, right? So yeah, everybody who is involved, right? In Texas, you can be a felony. It could be a first-degree felony for supporting or helping somebody get an abortion. So that's a provider, or there are the people that drive you, all those other things. The other thing that folks are looking at is self-managed abortions. So that's our fancy way of if you order something like abortion pill online and get it sent to your house, you are the self-person doing that. They are already prosecuting people, and they have been prosecuting people for that as well. And so the folks say that they're not going to come after women or pregnant folks right now. That doesn't seem like that's going to last for that much longer. So I just wanted to put that as an asterisk. And then the second piece of it, if you put the states where you see abortion restrictions, and then you put the states where you see voting restrictions and lay them on top of each other, they are almost the exact same states, right? States that have a lot of Black folks, about 55% of Black folks in this country live in the South. A lot of the states that you see voting restrictions and abortion restrictions are in the South. So not only are we going to see people not having access to live their full free lives and getting abortion access, that they also are not able to vote and be able to, choose the people who are going to represent them. But then if you get hit with a felony, that also takes you out of voting, but it takes you out of a lot of other stuff. So if you need some type of safety net program, guess who doesn't get that? Or if you need student loan help, a job, all those pieces as well. And so those asterisks are also showing what could, several layers of what could actually happen to people and a lot of Black and brown people in this country.
No, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, is it Texas that also has, for layman's terms, the $10,000 bounty?
Yes, that's the bounty. Yeah.
So you
Explain
can,
that.
so essentially, if you know of someone who has gotten an abortion,
You can tell. You can snitch.
you can snitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can snitch. And, I think there's also another lawsuit aspect of that if somebody, got an abortion and it somehow, impacted you, that you could sue in up to $10,000. Like it's some other language that is not just about snitching. It's about some other components too. So bounties, criminalization, and as you put it, just another pathway for us to be disenfranchised from the system.
Obviously the pro-life movement isn't particularly, just about the life and babies. It's just the tipping point of what's coming next. They're attacking birth control. They're attacking contraceptives. They're same-sex marriage. This is just the beginning of really infringing on everybody's personal rights.
Yeah, I think people, they have this assumption that it just stops there. And it's not necessarily a test case, but this is their entry point to do so many other things. And the contraception piece, I think, is very important because that has now been lumped into this where there's willfully trying to make, morning after pills, them not as accessible. And then just in general, a lot of health insurance providers in many areas, they're not required to cover birth control pills as part of your general healthcare package.
All right. So obviously, we've been discussing tough conversations the whole time and how we should be more open. But can you break down the actual rape and incest side of abortion?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Excuse me. For a couple of reasons. One, when it comes to rape and incest, we know that the numbers are underreported. But we also know that it's still fairly high. In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda did a poll with Black women specifically, and 33% that said that they had gotten sexually assaulted. So that's one out of three, right? And so we know that rape and incest, but definitely rape and sexual violence that happens to Black women is commonplace. I want to say it's commonplace that it should not be. I just would be very adamant about that. And that we know that these laws do not have, many of the states do not have any exception for rape and incest. So what does that mean? That means that women are going to be forced to carry their rapist child. And that anybody helping the person get an abortion or try to help someone get an abortion will face more time than the rapist themselves. So I was sitting at a training and they were talking about what this law really means. And they said, essentially, that the anti-choice folks want rapists to be able to choose the mothers instead of moms being able to choose what happened to themselves.
Jemele, when you hear something like that someone aiding in an abortion can get more time than the actual person, aiding an abortion where a woman was raped can actually get more time than the person that raped the woman.
Well, it's hard not to, because the other stat that she brought up was the frequency in which it happened. And I brought up earlier in this conversation that my mother was a rape survivor. And when she told me about that entire experience, the first thing when they did the rape kit on her at the hospital, they gave her a morning after pill. And so as these laws were coming into fruition, I couldn't help but think about my mother. And what if she would have been forced to carry the child of the man who raped her in a van with a shotgun to her head, right? And so it's very personal, for me, and not just beyond my mother. I mean, when I was 12, somebody tried to rape me, and I luckily escaped. What if I hadn't? And then what if I got pregnant and then forced to carry at 14 years old a child, based off what these laws are saying? So it says everything about what this issue is really about. It's certainly not about protecting babies, because that's what they always want to throw out there. It is about the control of women and our bodies. And it's always been about that. And for Black women, that's especially true, given the origins of gynecology, how enslaved women were operated on against their will, that really birthed the modern gynecology movement just throughout history at so many different points where we've lacked that control. And so I think for everybody, hearing the harsh reality of this, I hope it mobilizes all of us to really be vigilant, men, women, to be vigilant in this fight.
Van, as an outspoken as you are and as a Black man in this space, how do you feel like you can champion or further move this effort along after the conversation we've had?
Well, number one, I think continuously doing the research and getting the education. And the more that I know, the more I'll have, I'll be completely comfortable to be a part of the movement. And that's what I try to do, When everything first happened, when Dobbs first happened, I was thinking, okay, do I have an extra room in my house? Do I need to open up the extra room to my house to women that are coming to LA that might be able to have abortions? Do I need to, what is it? And me and Kalika had these conversations, what is it that we need to do? How do we do it? And we were moving so fast. And, I saw people that were going on social media being like, yo, if you need to come here and do this, blah, 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 not knowing that those things are not quite strategic and they make you targets when you do that. So I think part of it for me is facilitating conversations and using some of what I've been able to manage and gain in my career to have convos about how we do it right. And then to be able to take conversations like this, and if we do need to do some things like that, have them in spots and places to where the right information is being disseminated so that I can then disseminate the right information and then also amplify the voices that need that. And I think that's what I'm most excited about. See, for me, what happened with Dobbs is disgusting, but I like the fight and I want to win for good. Mm-hmm. Another thing that my mom told me after that was over was that she felt like, I heard this from my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother who was doing civil rights stuff in Baton Rouge back in the day, and my mother, who was, one of the biggest feminists I've ever met. I remember my grandmother would look at the TV when Trump was on TV, and she would be like, "I don't see how we got back here when it feels like we didn't do anything." And my mom felt the exact same way after Dobbs. She felt like we put in all of this work, we thought we won, and we're right back to the beginning. And so, to be honest with you, like in the position that I am in right now, there's a debt that I owe to the Black women who, in my life, really went the extra mile to make sure I was up on these things, to continue that for them, and to make sure that we don't see another group of young women years into the future who've grown up as second-class citizens in this country.
I have a silly question. So, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't birth control also used for other things other than birth control, like regulating periods, periods, and all of that kind of stuff? Or
Yeah.
Are people talking about that? Like, I was put on birth control when I was like 16 to regulate my period.
Yeah, same. I was put on it.
Just last month in July, they voted against making it federally protected because they're coming after it. Yeah, they're going to try to get rid of birth control.
And I have friends that like will pass out when they have their period if they're not regulated.
Yeah. No, everything's on the chopping block. When Clarence Thomas essentially put in his dissension, we're coming after birth control, we're coming after same-sex marriage. That was the map. They're like, this is the dog that catched up with the car, and they're kind of giddy, and they're like, let's come after everything, right? And so, and I think it's also important to know that, like, this is not about babies, right? This is about control.
Control.
Right? And it's particularly control of white women. The number one reason women leave the workforce is because of childcare, right? And so this is the this is a perfect way to get all those quote unquote uppity women out of their CEO boxes and back at home barefoot and being able to take care of their kids, because you don't hear them talking about childcare.
Nope.
You don't hear talking about maternity leave. We don't hear talking about this. It is just forcing people to have children, right? Yeah. And so, this is, although it has an impact that's disproportionately going to impact Black and brown folks, they're coming after white women. This is a space that they are shooting at white women who have gotten too far and need to be put back in line.
Because there's more women in college right now than men, right? And then I don't know if you guys saw that piece in Time about how, like, there's more, like, men education-wise are just not keeping up with women, right? And so you have them outpacing them by quite a bit. They're worried they'll take over the workforce, and then all their mediocrity will further be exposed and not tolerated. And I was like, and so it's a design that is far bigger than just, we're just coming after this. It's like, no, they really are on some, y'all need to get back there because we tired of dealing with y'all. We're tired of changing our workspaces for you. We're tired of making room for you. Like, it's time for y'all to go. And this is like a very easy way to get us to have to get out of what they feel like is their space.
Rightfully ours.
And these
Statistic lately that men
are lonelier than women. That's the other thing. Women are waiting longer to get married or not getting married at all. Women are more women are choosing not to have children. And so they just want to put a stop to all of that, because women have learned, or are this next generation of women, they're not defined by marriage needs to complete me. And that was never a concept that they thought would ever happen. So now they're like, y'all too educated. Y'all making a lot more money. Y'all really actually are building a life that is not revolved around us. We can't have that shit.
All right, well, we've had a great conversation today. I want to thank you guys. What are some action steps we feel like people who are watching this can take?
Yes, so I'm going to talk about two buckets. The first bucket is the very practical, and then the second bucket is the more visionary. So the practical piece. This is a state fight. So all the folks who are looking at, like, what are we going to do in the federal place? This is going to be a state fight. It's going to be a state fight for a very long time, and we're going to need to button up because it's going to be a long fight. With the trigger states, the reason why the trigger states were able...
Not to cut you off, trigger states. Explain, what is a trigger state?
Yes, sorry. So remember when I said we had to call people in the clinics, because there were some states that had teed up, if Roe v. Wade was ever overturned, that they would immediately will stop abortion, or like abortion will go into immediate effect and ban. There were 13 states. Only a handful of them actually went in that day, but there were some that went in that day, and those are the trigger states. And those trigger states were able to happen because they took over state legislators, right? We more than ever are going to feel our state legislators than we've ever felt them before. If you live in California, right, you can still have access to an abortion. The state legislator is working working with a lot of reproductive health rights and justice organizations to make sure that people have access, but also money, that we're moving folks, that folks have places to stay. And those are all super, super important pieces. And that's happening in other states. But we also know that to move across states is going to be an issue for folks, right? So California, we can only help you once you get to our border, right? And then we have all these resources for you. If you don't make it to us, then it becomes problematic. And one of the other things that we are super afraid of because of abortion access and all the people, particularly on like TikTok and all the things telling folks to do things, is that people get misdirected to a crisis pregnancy center or a fake clinic, which also can happen if you like move to you're going to a different state and then you don't know where to go. So they are a couple of pieces which I think is super important for people to think about. One is to link up with your local reproductive health rights and justice organization. They will have the best information about what you can do in your state. What you can do here in California is different than what you can do in Louisiana. It's different than what you can do in New York, right? And so they will help and be able to guide you. So sometimes we need your resources, your treasures. Sometimes we need your talent, right? And sometimes we need your time. And all of those things are super important, whether you are going to help or escort people to the clinic, drive, have a space for them to like stay overnight. All of them are gathering those pieces right now. The second piece is organizing around voting. We have an election coming up in 2022. A lot of people are looking at what's happening at the federal level. That is very important, but we also need to be hyper-focused what's happening in our state and local elections.
Because they are.
Because, like seriously, right? And I think it's important because of folks, particularly in California, love to be like, how are we going to go help folks in Arizona, right? We have work to do right here. And the people that you are able to move the most are people who are in your ecosystem already, right? I am more likely to listen to my friend or family member than I am to like some random person telling me like, calling me from California and I'm in Florida, telling me what I should be or thinking about or who I should be voting for. And so having small conversations, hosting those conversations like you are doing here, but doing those at your house over kitchen dinner, those are super important to
Playing
not
Madden.
only do playing Madden, right?
Online.
But I mean, I don't know much about that, but I support how you all do your political education. But that political education is super, super important. I think the last piece, when I'm thinking about the buckets and the more visionary piece, is that we need to stop being limited by white men's imaginations. So we are living into like the world that we have now, the space that we are in right this moment is by design. The future just doesn't happen. People make things in order for us to be in these spaces. So we need to also be steadfast in thinking about what our dream and what our vision is, right? And start moving towards that. One of the biggest things that kills movements is the loss of hope. And people are like, oh, well, this is too big to move.
But even if we don't see it in our lifetime, though.
Right.
You know what I mean? For our children or just for our people in general.
You got to have the hope and you got to push, right? And those are the things that we need to move for and think about and have and be creative, because if they can create this, we can also create a future that is kinder and better and more for the folks that we care about and love, that for them to have a freedom and the full lives and all of the autonomy, right? But we have to do the actions to do that. And that is being super focused and organizing and staying and knowing that this is going to be a long haul fight.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. We've seen, it's funny how we say, when we were prepping for this and talking before, like we've seen this coming. We know it was coming. And it got me thinking when I knew I was going to do this conversation. I'm a huge Tupac fan, but nearly 30 years ago, he said, since a man can't create one, he has no right to tell a woman when and where to create. Since a man can't make one, he has no right to tell women when and where to create one. So it's just that we do have to understand that this is, like you said, it doesn't happen luckily. This was planned, so we have to get out there and be proactive. And one thing I always say about policy and voting, state, federal, local, bite-sized pieces, because we were never meant to be in this space, have a voice, have a footprint. So, me being a former athlete, I didn't really get engaged until I was done. But then I look back, like people work every single day at this. You know what I mean? This is something we do on our spare, because we're all busy. Some people are full-time in this, but just to understand that there's bits and pieces and where you can really see immediate turnaround is on that local and state level. Obviously, like you said, federal is very important, but you see immediate turnaround when you focus on what is going on in your community, in your state. So just kind of wanted to leave people with that. Thank everyone here for a great educational conversation, and we hope to have more of these coming to you guys. Brought to you by P68. I'm your host, Matt Barnes. Thank you to our guests, and we'll see you guys next time.